everyone, and welcome back to my channel. It's Christina from Our Wood Home. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing my tips for how to start a garden from nothing. Of course, there's multiple ways to start a garden. There's no right or wrong way, in my opinion. This is just what I've done in the past and what has worked well for me, so I thought I would share that with you all. I'm mainly going to be talking about starting a vegetable garden, but you can definitely apply these tips to a flower garden as well. I'm also going to mainly talk about in-ground gardens, not raised beds, but I will share some tips for raised beds as well. On the screen, I'll just be showing some photos of my different gardens in various stages. I thought that would just be kind of interesting for you guys to see. On the screen now is my very first vegetable garden that we put in spring 2013. It was just a 10 by 10 plot that we just grew tomatoes in. This was a really interesting learning experience. I'd never done any gardening like this before. Before I was married, I had a couple little pots on my front steps at my parents' house, but I didn't do that regularly. I think I might have just done it once or twice. So this was something totally new to my husband and I. Next photo is the same garden, but doubled. So 20 by 10 feet. We just added another section because we realized we wanted to grow more things and we didn't have the space in our existing garden. Here are my tips for how to start a garden. First of all, be realistic with your expectations. Are you able to dedicate time to actually starting a garden? Do you have things like fencing, posts, good quality soil, a garden tiller, etc.? If not, will you have to buy those things or rent them? And if so, is that in your budget right now? Do you have space to put a garden in? And how much time can you spend working on the garden? My next tip is to follow the sun. Most vegetable plants need several hours of sunlight per day, so does your property have a suitable sunny location for a garden? Try to pick a spot that's south-facing. Note which direction the sun rises and sets across your property, and if any trees or buildings create shady spots. You can still plant in less sunny areas, but you should choose more shade-tolerant plants, such as leafy greens, cabbage, radish, broccoli, beets, or carrots. It's important to know your gardening zone. This is also called a hardiness zone or a planting zone, and it's defined by its average annual minimum winter temperature, which helps determine what plants are likely to thrive in this area. You can look up this information online. If you buy seeds locally or plants at a local nursery, they're going to be meant to grow in your zone. Personally, I think that buying seeds online is kind of risky because they don't always disclose what zones are most suitable. But when in doubt, you can just contact the seed company before ordering and ask them about the specific seeds you're interested in and which zones they're suitable for. I live in zone 5B. For example, watermelons aren't going to grow here. They grow best in zones 8 to 10, but they can actually grow in cooler zones such as mine. You just need to have good soil and make sure the plant stays warm and water it consistently. If the plant has a long maturity period, you may have to start the seed indoors and transplant outside later. Tomatoes are another good example of this for my specific zone. If I were to sow them outside in the ground once the risk of frost has passed, there's not going to be enough time for them to mature before the next frost happens. So I always start my tomato seeds indoors. The next thing to consider is how will you water your garden? Is your proposed garden space near a water source like a tap or a hose? Or are you going to have to carry water from somewhere else to that garden? If possible, consider a soaker or a drip hose for your garden watering. I find it to be more water efficient and gentle on the soil. It's not going to create big divots or wash away the soil like just a regular garden hose would. The steps to take when planning your garden. Choose a location. Next, remove the weeds and the grass to just expose the soil. This can be done by digging with a shovel and turning over the soil, or by using a garden tiller, or even just by covering the weeds and the grass with tarps or cardboard or something like that to kill them. Next step is to amend your soil if needed. If it's very dry, if you know it's depleted, or it's very sandy, or it just doesn't look great, you might want to amend it. You can use compost soil, manure, triple mix, etc., and just spread it evenly across the ground after you've killed the grass and the weeds. There are test kits you can buy online that measure the pH of your soil, or you can look into comprehensive tests at private testing labs in your area, but personally, I don't think this is essential. I've never done this with my gardens. I could tell right away that the soil was dry because when we started digging, we could see that there wasn't a lot of moisture underground, and my soil is very rocky. So that's why we chose to add extra soil into our proposed garden beds so that it's higher than just the regular ground. The next step is to consider a border or a barrier if needed. You can see in my photos of my first garden, we had to do a border of cedar posts around it because we were adding extra soil and we didn't want it to just wash away and mix in with the rest of the grass. A border or a barrier helps contain your soil and your plants if you've got some that like to spread. It also helps keep kids and pets out, also some other animals as well. Some options include just a thin green garden fencing that you can buy at hardware stores or home improvement stores. Here in Canada, I have found it at Canadian Tire and Home Hardware. You can also use metal chicken wire or rabbit fencing. You can even use snow fencing. There are a few different kinds of snow fencing. The one that I'm talking about is a wooden snow fence, which you'll see in some of the photos in this video. You can also just use the plastic bright orange snow fencing. I chose to use the wooden snow fence because it looks nicer and I think it's going to last a little bit longer than a plastic fencing, but I have used plastic before. I've also used wooden lattice pieces. When you are ready to plant, make sure your soil has been watered so that it's moist but not soaked unless the seed package says otherwise. I once used a seed tape for beet seeds and the package said specifically to soak the ground and then put the seed in. Your next step is going to be to plant your seed at the specified depth, which it will say on the seed package, but when in doubt, I do about 1/2 inch. Then cover that seed with your soil and keep the soil moist but not soaking wet. There's a lot of back and forth about mulching and not mulching your gardens. Mulch is really helpful because it can keep weeds down and retain moisture in the soil, but if you are using a soaker hose, you should be putting the hose under the mulch. Mulch can keep your garden looking neat and aesthetically pleasing, but it can be kind of expensive and it often contains dye, so that's something to keep in mind. If that's not a problem for you, if you don't mind that it has dye, that's great. Personally, I just didn't really want that in my garden. Of course, there is mulch that is undyed and untreated, but I haven't found that very easily at garden centers and stores near me. A problem I have with mulch is sometimes the weeds still grow on top of it, especially if you live in a windy area and the seeds from other weeds and grasses carry on the wind. The seeds will just land in the mulch and start growing there. Mulch can also hold on to mold. If you have a lot of moisture in your soil, it can start to mold. Some options for mulch include grass clippings from your yard. After you're done cutting the grass, put those clippings right into your garden. You can also use straw or hay, but keep in mind it might contain seeds, and then you might end up with that crop growing in your garden the next year. This has happened to me. It was not that big of a deal. We just pulled out the plants that had started growing from the previous year's hay. You can also use bark or wood chips as mulch in your garden. Keep in mind that there are some that might be too acidic. For example, spruce mulch from spruce trees. It's going to be acidic and it might affect some of your plants in your garden. You can also use landscape fabric to keep weeds down, but personally I have not used this, so I don't have any experience. I've had some friends tell me that it works amazingly well, so that's something to do some research about and to consider. If your soil is very contaminated, if you know there's contaminants in it and you don't feel comfortable growing food in there, or if your soil is very, very rocky, or it's mainly clay, or it just doesn't seem suitable in other ways, you could consider a raised bed or a container garden. They can be expensive to set up at first, but it might be worth it for you. I have some raised beds that my husband built me originally as flower planters, and it was expensive to fill them with soil because they're pretty big, but something I did to help bring down that cost is to fill them as much as I could with grass clippings and leaves and even pieces of wood and logs and sticks from my yard. That decreases the amount of space that you need to fill with soil. And as a bonus, when it breaks down, it adds nutrients into that soil. Of course, you'll have to keep topping it up as those pieces break down, but this is a great way to start with filling a planter or a raised bed. Another benefit, I think, for raised beds is it can be easier physically to maintain them. You don't have to be on your hands and knees or kind of crawling around in a garden, pulling out weeds or just maintaining it. It's definitely a little bit easier. Something I will say, if you plan to do any tilling or if you want to spread manure into your garden and then mix it in, that can be a little bit challenging with a raised bed, depending on how big it is. I still do this with my raised beds. I just get in there with a pitchfork and mix it around because I have that ability to do so physically, but just keep that in mind. You also don't even have to do a giant planter. You can just do some pots, some Home Depot buckets. Really, you can grow in anything. All of these tips do apply for flowers and herbs as well. I would suggest if you are wanting to grow flowers or herbs, you start the seeds indoors if possible, and then transplant them outside once it's safe to do so. You can still sow these seeds directly in the soil, but just make sure it's clearly defined in your garden or your planter, because these seeds are typically pretty small, and once they sprout, the seedlings might be hard to see. So that's why I like to do my flowers and my herbs inside, and then once they've germinated and sprouted, I can transplant them outside and mark where I've put them. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you found it interesting and informative. Let me know if you have any other tips to share for how to start a garden. Please leave those in the comments below. If you like what you see here on my channel, I hope that you consider subscribing. Again, thank you so much for watching and have a great rest of your day.